There's a moment in every roast called the Maillard reaction. It's the same chemical process that you see when you see caramelization of onions or bake a crust on a bread. The raw becomes complex, the green becomes aromatic. Every flavor note is born from that moment. In this episode of the Cold Brew Lab, we're going to be talking about roasting. I'm Major Cohen. Welcome to the Cold Brew Lab. We're talking roasting today, a key step in taking what is a really simple bean and transitioning it into an incredibly complex beverage. And in that transition, we're almost going through a miraculous process that is both a combination of art and science that brings out of that green bean something you would never anticipate that it has. So you may be surprised, or perhaps not surprised, that the green coffee bean is both flavorless and really hard. In fact, it's so hard that if you put it in a coffee grinder, it would probably damage your grinder or the burrs of the grinder. The roasting process is building that bean. But one of the things you have to remember is that in the Cold Brew Lab, we're not talking about anything but cold coffee. And so I want to talk a little bit about the decisions that we at Cumulus had to make, roasting specifically for a cold result. Now, what does that mean? Well, quite simply, roasting coffee is taking that green bean through a process that is time and temperature. The time begins, the temperature starts off at a certain temperature and gets hotter or cooler until you reach the end. It's a path. And the path that you find to bring that roasted coffee to a beautiful finish is different for cold coffee. And Cumulus had to learn that because no one else had done that, roasting coffee for cold brew coffee. What I want to explain to you in the briefest of ways is kind of that transition, which we're going to talk about, that the green seed goes into until it's somewhere down here in the path and it's a roasted coffee. We take that green seed and we put it into a roaster machine. That machine can be a drum, it can be an air machine that basically circulates hot air, but essentially we're applying heat to the coffee. The minute you put it in that drum, the coffee itself takes some of the heat away and you begin to transition that green bean. The first thing that happens is it loses moisture. It begins to lose moisture very quickly. Incidentally, it's losing a little weight as well. After maybe 5 minutes, 6 minutes, it goes through a really incredible transformation we call first crack or first pop. It's really unbelievable when you experience it as a roaster standing next to your roasting machine because you can hear it. There's a little device you've seen in pictures when you see roasters or videos where they take some coffee out with a little device called a trier and they look at the coffee and they can see this happening. When that first crack happens, the side of the coffee bean, which has a seam, pops open because it's so affected by the heat. There are oils and elements inside the coffee bean that are actually dramatically changing. At first pop, the coffee is going to be very light roasted. When you're roasting specialty coffee, or coffee where you're looking for complexity in characteristics, you continue the roast, and these are the times when it's critical for the roaster, the scientist, to combine his or her skill as an artist, because they have to almost live the coffee's experience in the roasting machine to understand what's happening because it's an agricultural product. Every bean is different. In the next few minutes, as we head into the 9, 10, and 11 minutes, you're moving on the path we talked about, and the coffee is becoming more and more excited in this hot environment. In fact, it gets so excited that there is a second pop, and it's called that, second pop or second crack. What's happening to the bean itself is the domed side of the bean is beginning to almost become smoother, and parts of it are almost beginning to flake off in that second crack. This is when the roaster has to really know their coffee, because they have to understand that all of those flavor elements that you're looking for with acidity, which, remember, the greener coffee and the first crack coffee were lighter and they are more acidic. What's happened is that acidity has been dropping off, and the second characteristic that we've talked about, complexity and body, is beginning to increase. Now, down in this end, when you're in the last few minutes of your roast, you're essentially in the pivotal moment when you can make or break any coffee, because you're headed into dark roast. The minute you get into some of this dark roast, you begin to lose some of the body and you begin to lose some of the acidity. And you're headed to something that is very well loved, but not as complex, with very little acidity, very little body, but all of that roastiness that dark coffee lovers have come to enjoy. That process takes 9 to 15 minutes depending on where you're headed, the target in your path. So now let's talk cold brew and how that process adapts for the cold coffee experience. We've talked a lot about extraction in the Cold Brew Lab, and we know that extraction is different for cold brew. We had to adjust the roast to make that difference happen in the way that we wanted it to in order to achieve the cup we were after. We had to make adjustments to the curve. Perhaps we slowed the roast down by lowering the temperature. Perhaps we sped it up a little bit by raising the temperature. We did all of that so that we could hit the profile that we knew, based on our tasting, would bring out the best attributes for cold brew extraction, unlike the way that we had done it in the past for hot coffee extraction. I have huge respect for the Cumulus roasting team that basically made this happen. They had to make hundreds of adjustments and then taste the coffees to see if we were getting it. It's important to remember that, to our knowledge, no one had done that work with cold coffee as a target until Cumulus. We changed the way coffee is roasted in order to achieve the greatest cold coffee experience that we think has ever been achieved. So there's two misconceptions that I want to touch on briefly. One is that many people assume that we roast for color. We do consider the color when we look at the coffee. In fact, in the end, oftentimes we look at it, it's light, it's medium, it's dark. But the color of the coffee is only one telling attribute, because the way you got to the color, all of that work in the path that I talked about, that plays a key part. And you can have the same coffee roasted to the same color, and if the path was different, the coffee will taste different. Many people have a misconception that cold brew should always be dark roast. Well, I gotta tell you, a lot of the cold brews that you've had have been roasted dark roast. Number one, because people didn't think it mattered. And number two, if you have a slightly lesser quality coffee, you can mask things when you roast it darker. No one really has gone into how do we create different, extraordinary, differentiated experiences in roasting the coffee, light, medium, and a little towards the dark side in order to create a great cold coffee experience. So what have we learned in this little bit of time that we've been talking about roasting? Well, one of the things we learned is that Cumulus has paid attention to a number of the details that up until now, most cold coffee producers had not really considered. What I can tell you is that every step of the way, as we realized that you couldn't simply approach roasting in the way that you had, we had to revisit all of the decisions we were making, taking green to roasted somewhere. All of those decisions that we made, that things we learned, are what resulted in our ability to say to you, no one else has a line of coffees that offers you a range of roasts, a range of origins, through a brewing process that is unique. No one else has that but Cumulus Coffee. We've had 5 episodes of the Cold Brew Lab, and over those 5 episodes we've explored origin, we've explored basics around roasting, we've looked at cold brew and how you brew it, we've looked at nitro, and we've looked at the differences that nitro brings you in the cup. Quite honestly, this is just the beginning. We've only scratched the surface of what we can tell you from Cumulus about coffee and the world of coffee that we're privileged to be able to operate in. What we hope is that we've opened a door for you, and we've piqued your curiosity a little bit. We've come far, but we have so much further to go in order to provide you with what we're learning about coffee, especially cold coffee, that we didn't know before, and many of the things that we knew before, and we just wanted to begin to bring them to you so that you'd be a more informed consumer. We'd love to hear from you what you thought, and also what you think we might do in the future, because we would love to make more cold brew episodes so that you can learn more about cold brew coffee, and you can learn along with us as we learn about cold brew coffee. So let us know. This has been the Cold Brew Lab. I'm Major Cohen. Thank you so much.